There are many ways to use runes in divination. I've often been asked what method is best to use, rune casting or layouts. The simple answer is individual preference. In this episode and the following, I'll discuss the various ways to use casts and layouts in divination and help you understand which method to use in different settings. In part 1, we'll go over casting techniques, and in part 2, we'll dive into rune layouts. So listen on, Rune Weavers, as we learn to cast on the cast, right here on the Rune Ways Podcast. Hello friends, and welcome to the show. Today I want to talk about rune casting. I have a lot of folks who are new to runes and ask me how to use them for divination. How do they pick them? How many should be used? What method is right? I find it odd that most of the books that I read on runes only focus on layouts and not really on casting techniques. And as I started to use the runes and started practicing with them, I was not familiar with tarot at all, so casting seemed quite natural for me. I found there were many ways of casting, which I found rewarding and inspiring. That said, I still mainly use a layout technique when reading for others, especially in smaller spaces with limited table room. I'll talk all about various layouts in part 2 of this podcast. Experimenting with all the methods is key to finding out what works best for you. Let's start with what's common in all the rune books you might find on the shelf. Most explain the single, double, and triple rune pull. This is as simple as reaching into your rune bag, pulling out the designated number of runes you want, and laying them out before you. This method of divination is ideal for daily self-practice. The runes are chosen and laid out in the forward orientation and contemplated on. This is technically a layout, as the runes are not tossed in any way, but just pulled and placed. It's a great way to answer quick questions, gain immediate insight, or a peek at what to expect for your day or week. But before we get too far into layouts, which we'll cover in part 2, let's start with simple rune casting techniques. The first one I like to call a rune toss. This is where you take a specific number of runes, 9 is common, or a random handful from your bag, and you toss them outward away from you. You'll need some room for this, so a larger rune cloth and some floor space work well here and are recommended. Try to toss them as straight away from you as you can, not too hard but enough to cover within about 3 feet or so. Only pick the runes that are face up. Note that if a rune is turned where any of it's facing down toward you, this is considered a reversed rune, so place it as such. Imagine horizontal lines going down the rune field. Any rune that is turned enough to pass the line is reversed. You'll start with the rune closest to you. Take that rune and place it first. Depending on how many runes are face up, you should have enough to discern past, present, and future. So next, let's talk about rune drops. This is where you again take a number of runes or a handful and hold them above the rune cloth and just simply let them drop onto it. You can discern the rune order as well as forward and reverse by using the spiral method. I personally have a rune cloth that has a spiral on it just for this technique, but you can use a blank cloth as well and just imagine the spiral starting from the center of the drop outward in a clockwise fashion. Read only the runes that are face up. Start at the center and follow the spiral until it hits a rune. Pick that one up and work your way around the spiral in the same way until you get the order of the runes. To consider reversed runes, you'll use the center of the spiral as your forward-facing focal point. So runes that are turned away from the center and face outward, past its horizon line, can be considered reversed. Use the line of the spiral as a horizon mark for the rune. You can also take a look at how the runes fell before you put them out and put them in order in front of you. See which land by another. See how close they were and how far away from the center they land. Consider this in your divination. This could inspire guidance if you let your intuition help you read them as they lay. Once you have pulled the runes from the spiral and laid them out in front of you, you can discern their meaning going from left to right, from past into the now, and then into the future. That is, if there are enough to read like that. I always try to balance them out in a way that makes sense, depending on how many were face up during the cast. The key to good casting techniques is simply a bit of practice. Take some time to try out the casting methods over and over. Getting the feel of how many to randomly pull out of the bag, or how high to drop them, or how hard to cast them away from you takes practice. So try it a few times, and don't worry about the results of the casting either. You won't be adding any intentional energies into them, so the results won't apply to your life. This is also a great way to study the runes. Find runes in your practiced casts that you may not be so familiar with, and look them up. See how they would relate to other runes. You can still see a story in the cast, even if it's for a fictional client. Now you may get inspired to create rune cloths just for casting or dropping. Some techniques have rune cloths that have designated intentions into them, so reading is discerned from where the runes land in what area is depicted on the cloth. Think of it sort of like a dartboard, only where the darts are randomly thrown, each section offering a designation. For example, a cloth that can be drawn with concentric circles or various sections laid out in a pattern of sacred geometry. Sections could include intentions such as past influences, hidden truths, future concerns, current states of being, outside influences, home, work issues, relationships, and so on. This is similar to layouts and tarot in its intentions, just a different way of applying the runes to them. Well, I hope this brought you a little insight on how to cast runes for divination. In part 2, I'll talk about layouts, what I use, as well as what others have explained in some of my favorite rune books. Thanks for listening, Rune Weavers, and may your holidays be festive.